Okay, welcome today to another Republican Stronghold. And today we have a candidate for the Court of Criminal Appeals, John Messinger. Now, my first question and my first reminder to the voters is there are actually two places for the Court of Criminal Appeals that are going to be on their ballot. So if you could just take a minute and explain a little bit about how that works and which place you're on the ballot for.
Sure. So the Court of Criminal Appeals is your state's highest court for criminal law matters. We have two Supreme Courts in Texas. One of them's for civil matters, one of them's for criminal. Basically, we've got the high courts. Below them, we have 14 courts of appeals. And below that, we have all the trial courts. There are 9 judges, including a presiding judge in our court. Every 2 years, 3 of the places are up for re-election. After presiding judge, they're numbered. The numbers have nothing to do with territory or anything like that. It is a statewide court. It sits as a group of 9, and 3 of them are up for re-election. Judge Urey does not have an opponent. So places 3 and place 9 are on the ballot. I'm running for place 9 with 1 opponent.
Okay, that's great because people can get confused when they just see Court of Criminal Appeals as to.
And there'll be a Court of Appeals race, and their spots are also numbered. So trying to keep the courts. The court needs a better name.
Right.
Is really what the problem is.
Right. So why don't we talk a little bit about the courts themselves? So I moved here more than 10 years ago from a state where judges are appointed, and they're appointed by the governor. And then after a period of time, they get tenure. And so we have absolutely no right to vote for the judiciary at any level. And here in Texas, people do. But what I find is they don't really understand the various levels of the judiciary. So maybe we could take a little bit of time and teach the folks out there something about the Court of Criminal Appeals. How do you get your cases? Where do they come from? How many do you hear every year? What's the backlog look like? I know that's a lot of things, but
sure.
I think that would be a really helpful primer for the people who are watching Republican Stronghold.
Yeah, and this is tough. I'm glad I have the opportunity. We do have elected judges here. I ran for our 3rd Court of Appeals. There are 14 of them around the state. The 3rd Court sits in Austin, covers 24 counties, including Bastrop. And a lot of people asked me during that last race, is it good that we have the opportunity to elect judges? And I steal from Churchill and I say, electing judges is probably the worst way to do it, except for all the other ways of doing it. And the problem is, there are so many things to vote for already, and people are busy enough as it is to try to figure out who to vote for Congress or the Texas legislature. And you throw on judges, it's just a lot. Mm-hmm. And then you throw on the fact that we have ethical rules, which make sense as written. You would not want somebody to say, oh, I think John did that murder, and then have him sit as a judge in that case, either at trial or on appeal. And that makes sense. And you wouldn't want a judge to sit on a case who made a specific guarantee about how he would rule on an area of law. What candidates do is to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. They don't talk about anything. So you get to vote for judges, but if you say, hey, just generally, what do you think about self-defense law? Or what do you think about this? And they say, I'm sorry, a case like that may come before me. So you get to vote for us, but judges will tell you nothing useful for you to gauge, do I agree with how you view the law? Because ultimately, the beauty of being able to pick judges is that you get to see, if you want to, you can look at the work they do and you can see, did you follow the law this way you said you would? Because every judicial candidate, you've heard it, everyone's seen it. I joke that it's almost like a police lineup. All they talk about is their philosophy, and we get 1 minute, 2 minutes at a gathering. And so it's like judicial candidate 1, step forward and read from the card. And it says, I'm an originalist, and I'm a strict constructionist, and golly, do I love Scalia. And all of these things are good, and you hope they mean it, but they know you want to hear it. And so it just becomes very tough to try to figure that out.
Right.
And not a lot of judges have a big paper history where you can do that. So I don't envy voters. And I mean, I'm a career appellate prosecutor, but again, only on the criminal side. So as much experience as I have doing appeals, I don't have particular insight on civil appellate attorneys. So I feel for regular people who are trying to make an informed choice, and it just gets hard. At least, though, we can inform everybody about how the system generally works. And so I'll just pick an example. Let's say you kill somebody.
Oh, there you go.
Well,
great.
You've already said you're from New Jersey, so there's a pretty good chance. You didn't say it. I know that. Full disclosure, I'm also from New Jersey. I know I'm trying to get elected here.
There you go.
I moved here to go to Baylor in 2003. You commit a murder, you get convicted, that'll happen in a district court because it's a felony. Because presuming it happens in Bastrop, you have an appeal as a matter of right. You would appeal to the Third Court of Appeals. The last couple of years, they've been very behind on their work, so it might get transferred somewhere else. But let's just say it stays there. Then whatever happens, the losing party there would have the right to ask the Court of Criminal Appeals, because it's like the U.S. Supreme Court. The Court of Criminal Appeals could not possibly review all of the appeals from across the state. There are just way too many. There are 9 of them. They have a large staff. There are 20-something people on staff. Each judge has got a full-time briefing attorney and an intern that normally serves about a year straight out of law school. And then you've got maybe 5 attorneys there doing intake, a bunch of them doing post-conviction writs, and the death squad who works on the death penalty cases. But let's say your murder conviction gets reversed. I work at the state prosecuting attorney's office. It is not affiliated with the Attorney General's office, but by statute, our agency, which is the smallest agency in Texas, it's 3 lawyers and a secretary.
Wow.
Yep. Agency 213. Our job by statute is to represent the state of Texas in the Court of Criminal Appeals. We could do everything, but with 3 lawyers, we're not going to do everything. So the primary thing that we do is we look at all the cases that the state loses in the 14 courts of appeals. Then we will call out to the local office if it seems like something's up. Look, sometimes somebody just didn't get a fair trial. And we'll just make sure that that's what happened if it's as bad as it looks, and we'll let it go. Because even when you know the guy did it, that's our system isn't, hey, do you think he did it? It's, was it proved beyond a reasonable doubt in a fair trial? And sometimes people didn't get a fair trial, and so it gets redone. Sometimes we look at the case and we say either this Court of Appeals has not applied the law properly, and you call out and you find out from the local office, like, yeah, and they left out a bunch of stuff, or they misconstrued an argument, because it happens. Or they applied case law properly, and I hesitate to call it case law because we have law, which comes from the Constitution and from legislators, and we have decisions that interpret that.
Right.
Now, they're legally binding, and I know it sounds nitpicky, but decisions can change. A court can rethink its decision a year, 2 years. I just won a case a couple months ago. It was a 20-year decision that they overruled. So courts can and should clean up after themselves.
So that's why sometimes in the political world, we're bound by Supreme Court decisions. And you read about people who say, oh, we need to find a case to get that back to the Supreme Court.
That's it.
Because that needs to be rethought.
The language of the Fourth Amendment has not changed since it was ratified. The decisions about how it applies in certain situations have been expanded, have changed. You used to be able to, you arrest somebody who's in a car, you used to be able to search the car as a matter of right, a case called Belton. 20 or 25 years on, the court says, no, that never made sense, and we're not going to do that anymore. So it's a much more narrow circumstance.
Well, now, and it's my understanding that if they have a dog, one of the drug dogs, they can't even stick. I think there was a recent decision
that came out of our office.
They can't even stick their nose through the window. You're breaking that plane, yes, and that requires a warrant.
Yeah, and I don't think that's been taken up to the Supreme Court because the Court of Criminal Appeals has the final say on matters of Texas criminal law. But if you're dealing with a federal constitutional issue, you could take that to the U.S. Supreme Court. But they take a tiny percentage of cases.
Right.
So. Getting back to your murder conviction that you got reversed. So we would call out to the DA in Bastrop, and we'd figure out what's going on with it. And if we think it either was just wrongly decided, just straight up wrong, or properly followed a case that we would like to do something about, we would work out between us and the local DA who's going to take it up. And unless we're dealing with a Dallas or a Harris County, almost certainly our office is going to take it up. We just have more expertise, and local offices are really busy.
And by your small office taking it up, you mean that now goes to the Court of Criminal Appeals?
Well, we're going to ask.
You're going to ask them to hear it.
So the first thing you do, right, you file what's called a petition for discretionary review, PDR. And I do a presentation on this for our bar association just about every year. The D is for discretionary. I put up a Sesame Street thing, and guess what you have to remember? They don't have to take it.
Right.
They could take none of those cases a year. we're now back to pre-COVID numbers, because there was a while there when if you don't have trials, you don't have appeals. And if you don't have appeals, you don't have review of appellate decisions.
Right.
So we're back up to over 1,000 PDRs filed in a year.
Wow.
And last couple of years, they have granted 30 to 35. They used to grant 100 a year. The workload used to be a lot heavier, and they still used to do more. It's been a problem. But if you get the PDR granted, and I should say, I think I said between 6 to 9% is what their historic average has been. Our office is around 50%. Mine's almost at 60. Again, this is what we do.
Right.
And so you get the PDR granted, then you have 30 days to do a brief. The other side has time to do a brief. You can ask for very short extensions. Sometimes you get oral argument, and then you wait. And it's getting better, but it got to the point in 2024 where, on average, you would wait 500 days to get an opinion out of them.
Wow.
Yeah. In 2014, it was 196, I think is the number they have. And I remember I used to argue cases in May or June, and we'd have an opinion by Halloween.
Right.
In your run-of-the-mill case. And it's hard to figure out why, but you can imagine what a problem that is, because it isn't just the defendant and the victim or the survivor or the victim's families in that case. They're taking cases that are important to Texas. That's what you have to, part of convincing them to do is to say, this is worth your time.
Right.
You know, in the old days, it was, you're going to only do 100 of these. Now it's, you're only going to do 30 or 35 of these. So pick one that we're all going to learn something from.
Right.
And so you could have, say with our revenge porn statute, I defended that, I want to say 2016 or 2017. It took them 900 days to come out with an opinion. And while we were waiting, the legislature—
It's almost 3 years.
Yeah. While we were waiting, the legislature met twice and changed the statute while we were all waiting. And you can imagine how many times, thankfully, most of these crimes don't happen a lot, but there are enough jerks who are sending around naked pictures of their ex-girlfriends to neighbors and peoples at church that we had prosecutors' offices and law enforcement agencies from around the state saying, hey, is this constitutional or not? Should I file this or not?
And you don't know because a decision hasn't been rendered.
And you don't know, and there are courts of appeals that were sitting on those cases. Statute of limitations is running because, you know, it's not like it's murder.
Right.
There's a limit to how long you have for these things. And I mean, it got to the point where courts of appeals stopped waiting and just said, we got to move our docket too. Right.
Now, are these cases that come up to the Court of Criminal Appeals, are they heard by the entire court, or are they heard by, you know, a subset of 3 of the judges, or how is that managed?
All 9 of them.
All 9.
In the lower courts of appeals, depending on the region, it's divided up by workload geographically, and so you can see it's 14. You know, the 1st and 14th court. There are 2 courts of appeals that sit in Houston, and they both have the same, I want to say 8 counties, but obviously a giant number of people in Houston. Whereas the 3rd court covers 24 counties, because once you get out of, you know, this immediate area, it's Bell to Comal, it's Lee and Fayette, all the way out to Sterling.
Wow.
There's not a lot of people between here and San Angelo. And it's kind of an odd shape. The Panhandle, the 7th court up there is in Amarillo. So, but like the 10th court in Waco has 3 justices. The Dallas court, I want to say, has got at least 9. And the ones that, and sometimes they have 4. The ones that have more than one, they all sit in panels of 3.
Okay. And
they rotate. If you don't like what your panel did and the court has more than 3 justices, you can ask for en banc reconsideration. And I tell you all that to say that the Court of Criminal Appeals for a long time now has only sat as a group of 9 on everything. There are separate procedures for reviewing writs when things are frivolous. Like I said, there's a team of people that go through and just on technical deficiencies. There are only certain things that you can complain about after you've gone through the appellate process. And if you're complaining about something you can't, it just goes in the friv file.
Right.
So it doesn't take, my understanding is you don't have 9 of them that review things off their friv file, but everything else. And it's been suggested that you can get things going on the court by sitting in smaller groups. I don't see how I don't think that's the problem. It seems like it's not, you have too many people arguing over things and And by the way, if there are, then that's what it is, because we've elected 9 people on that court.
Right.
The problem, as near as I can tell, is the original opinion, the first draft, is not getting out of somebody's chambers. And I don't think it's all of them. I can't tell you exactly who.
Right. Well, you don't know to get in there. You don't really know that.
You can, when an opinion comes out, you can look at it and you can see who authored it, and you can have a good idea. Have they had this the whole time? Because sometimes you'll look at a dissent and you'll say, wow, that's really, really thorough for a dissent. And so you get the impression, you see this with U.S. Supreme Court cases. And with Obamacare was a good example.
Right.
Where you looked at Scalia's opinion, you're like, this was the majority opinion and somebody switched.
Right.
Because the dissents normally don't do the big factual and procedural setup and things like that. So there are times when you can look at it and you can say, for example, when Presiding Judge Keller was still there, if she handed down an opinion where she was the author and it was like after 2.5 years, it's not because Presiding Judge Keller took 2.25 years to circulate something. That case was taken from somebody who either lost the vote or for some other reason. It started in some other
They
chamber.
sat on it.
And so if you study the court, you can see these things and
Right.
have some idea. But my understanding is that it used to be you've got 6 months.
Right.
The briefing's done, or we've heard oral argument. You drew it. You've got 6 months. Circulate something, and after you circulate something, the first guy can pick it up maybe for a month, and the second guy gets to pick it up for 2 weeks, and it
moves.
It winds down, and it says,
Right.
You haven't changed anybody's mind with your side opinion. We're going to put it out.
Yeah.
Because this needs to be done. And if you want to write something. You can write it later if you want, but people need to know.
People need to know.
Yeah.
Now, every death penalty case comes to the Court of Criminal Appeals, correct?
Yes, unless you waive your right to appeal,
Okay.
it goes to the Court of Criminal Appeals the same way a regular murder would go straight to, in my example, the Third Court of Appeals.
Okay.
And so in that way, they're...
So my case would have made
That's right.
Made it to the Court of Criminal Appeals.
I use that example. I was talking to a civics group the other day, and I just picked out another middle-aged woman like you, and I said, and she
You're so flattering.
and she said, I would never. I said, well, not with that attitude, but if you applied yourself and you
Right.
really tried, I think you could pull it off. You wouldn't get away with it. But, yeah, so that's and like the Supreme Court says death is different. It doesn't change at its heart, it's still a murder trial.
Right.
So the nuts and bolts of that are the same, but yes, obviously a lot of extra procedural protections because of the extreme remedy on the other end. And they have a full team for that, but that does go directly to them. So most of the time they will be reviewing, and technically what they're doing is they're reviewing the Court of Appeals' application of law to the trial court. It's not, although functionally a lot of times it ends up, they say like, oh, you guys did it wrong, and then we're just going to do it. So it ends up looking like what they call a de novo review.
Right.
As though they were the first Court of Appeals
Interesting.
to look at it.
Interesting. Well, I find the courts very interesting. I'm sure we're going to have some folks who are going to be watching this who go, whoa, that went like this. So explain to folks, if you can, just quickly what they should be evaluating, because you do have an opponent.
Yes.
So when you say, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to vote in that particular judicial race for
Court of Criminal Appeals,
Court of
Place
Criminal
9.
Place 9, or even something they could apply to the Place 3, because you're running for the same court. So what are like the bullet points that you would put out that say, this is what average Joe who's walking into the polling place to vote ought to be thinking about when they're casting that vote?
And this is the other place where it gets difficult. To be legally qualified to be on one of our courts of appeals, you need to pass the bar, and then you need to not die for 10 years. That's it. If you're in good standing with the bar for 10 years, as far as I know, you don't actually have to practice law. You just have to maintain your license. And that's it. And it would suit me if you had to have large numbers of appellate experience, or large amounts, because I do. But you can easily imagine somebody who, you don't do appeals, but you've been an excellent trial attorney for 20 years. You've been on the district court bench for 20 years. So you've done something that should mean that you have familiarity with criminal law and the ability to make these decisions. But because we don't have that requirement, you can't assume that there's a vetting where what you're doing is you're picking from two, or in the other race, gosh, four people who have very, very varied resumes.
Right, very diverse.
And because there's no requirement, and appellate people, career appellate people like me, most of us are weird. I joke that I'm high functioning for an appellate attorney. Most of us are very shy. We don't want to be in front of juries. We don't want to speak publicly. So we end up not running for office. Just give us a computer, give us the problem, we'll work it out, we'll write the brief. And so trial attorneys will come to us for answers and things like that, but it's a different skill set and it's a different mindset. And that makes it tough for voters because you don't often you see this more on the civil side. But on the criminal side, you don't often see a lot of people who do criminal appeals for a living end up seeking office. Maybe most of them are smarter than I am. And so you end up having to pick from people, and since almost nobody has just well, obviously you are a high-level career appellate attorney. So this person's got jury trial experience, and this person maybe has been on a district court bench for some amount of time, and this person hasn't been an advocate, but they've worked behind the scenes at a court of appeals, or this person just has a lot of various litigation in adjacent areas to criminal law.
So I could be a lawyer for a Fortune 100 company and turn around and decide I want to run for this position.
You could write wills for 10 years.
Gotcha.
Or do property law. And we have an election process, and the party asks you how much experience. And honestly, I should know this, whether or not it's the party or the Secretary of State that mandates the question on the questionnaire when you give your application. I know who I gave the money to when I applied, but they do ask the question, how many trials have you done recently? How many appeals have you done? How many oral arguments have you done? So somebody is wanting to figure out something about this.
Right.
But I have not seen any official source do a ranking or anything like this, or a recommendation. So I don't know if this is going into the hopper and somebody's trying to figure out, could we have a minimum level? Because if you did something like 5 or 10 appeals, everybody would find a way to do 5 or 10 appeals, and then it would become another meaningless stat. So it really is a tough choice in a lot of cases.
Right.
And the other problem, I have so much experience in front of this court, in fact, more than anybody else in the last 15 years. I don't want to undercut that argument, but the sad thing is there are people who have a lot of experience and look great on paper, but I disagree wholeheartedly with almost all the decisions that they make.
Right.
And it's a statewide court, so it's all Republican. And I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that anytime you find a Republican who does things that you don't like, somebody jumps to Soros-funded rhino plant.
Right.
Some of those people exist, but it's to the point now where it's not helpful.
Right.
And it's not helpful within the party. It's not helpful for voters to help.
I would agree with that, and I think that's one of the reasons that I really wanted to have a more detailed conversation with you, because the buzzwords don't help the voter, in my opinion. That George Soros funded doesn't really help the voter. I think you have to look through the lens of, how do the courts and the decisions they make affect my day-to-day life?
And if you're voting for an incumbent, you can take the time and you can find the decisions that they wrote and that they joined, and you say, okay, this is how you view criminal law. Do I like this? Because at the end of the day, it's your court.
Right.
What I don't want is for have anybody to say, well, he went to law school, she practices criminal law. This sounds stupid, but I guess it's right. Like, no, that's
right.
I'm smarter than the average bear. I'm more experienced at this than almost anybody you're going to meet. That doesn't make me infallible. And at the end of the day, the customer is always right. The voter is always right.
Right.
And so you have to do what you can as a voter to get out there and ask questions. And again, it's tough because very few people have a resume where you can say, and I don't want to be unfair to defense attorneys. I don't think we really have any. Some people in a couple of the races have some experience. Defense attorneys and civil attorneys have an obligation to make the arguments that are the best for their client,
right,
even if they don't personally believe in them. That is not a knock. That's an important ethical obligation that they should take seriously. Prosecutors don't have that luxury. We have an ethical obligation to seek justice, not just convictions. And all of that to say is to say that I've never made an argument in a brief that I don't believe in. Now, sometimes I change my mind over time, and there's
Right.
surrounding law that makes what I thought, it undercuts some of the rationale for it. But I'm in a unique position where you could go to the court's website and you could put in my last name in the attorney field, and you could read hundreds of briefs that I've written. And so you might have an opportunity, if you take it, to say, I have a firm grasp of where this guy is on criminal
Right.
law. Almost nobody has an opportunity to say that, but somebody is going to win these races.
Right.
And so you're left with endorsements, which are they end up being extremely important because having been through the process, the questionnaires are normally thorough, the interviews are pretty thorough. I've been asked questions about things that I did not think they were going to look into. So it is some help for people who just don't have the time to vet. I mean, in Harris County, there are something like 90 people on the
Right.
primary ballot, and for better or for worse, most of them are trial court positions, and they couldn't find more than one Republican to take a chance because if you run against a judge you practice in front of a lot.
Yeah.
I would not run for something against an incumbent if I wasn't going to stand before God and man and say this person needs to be retired.
Be replaced. Yeah.
And if you don't win, that doesn't go well for
Right.
you and your clients. So
Right.
I'm not a hero,
Right.
but
I think that's a common thought. Like the first race that I ever ran, and we were an all Republican town, I ran against a very beloved individual who was a Republican,
Yep.
and I ran against the incumbent. And I think you always have that question of, well, what will he think of me? What will his friends think of me?
did you go to him first to tell him you were
I
going to run?
absolutely did.
Right. And
Because what I sat down and said to him is, I'm not running against you. I'm running for that seat on the town council. We have some disagreements with where we think the town is going,
that's it.
and I think I bring a lot to the table. So I did. I went to him first and said, I want you to know, this isn't a me against you thing. This is who can do the best job for the citizens.
Because there's nothing
Sitting
worse,
up
and
there.
I've been, again, this is my second campaign. I've been to lots of campaign forums. I've heard all the local candidates, and there is nothing worse than somebody who says, oh, Bill does a good job, but I think I could do a good job too.
Right.
How much free time do you have, or how badly do you want a title that you're going to spend everyone's time and money running against somebody that you think is doing a good job?
Right.
I mean, when I ran for the Third Court of Appeals, it used to be an all-Republican court. 4 out of the 6 justices were replaced in the Beto wave in 2018.
Yes.
We lost
I
the
remember
other
that
2
one.
right, and we lost the other 2 in successive
Yep.
elections, and including the last one that I lost. But when I ran to take back one of those seats, actually no, 3 elections after that. But I didn't run because Democrats are magically bad at things.
Right.
Because I know Republicans aren't magically good at things.
Yeah.
But the guy I picked to replace, who ended up not winning his primary, he had 0 appellate experience, but also did not even claim to have any whiz-bang trial experience that showed he had familiarity with the law.
Right.
The one nice thing I can say about him is he had the foresight to be the only Democrat in the primary, thinking if this Beto thing happens, I win just by having a D next to my name.
Next to my name.
And-
Yeah, see. And
and
in my case, there was a major issue facing the town. And I ran because I had a very different viewpoint about where the town should go. It was a housing issue.
Yep.
And we were being forced by the state of New Jersey to build double the size of our town in 6 years to build low and moderate income housing.
Yep.
And
Why I'm
so,
here.
so the town council was willing to settle. And I'm the one who went to the council meeting and said, somebody should be able to stop this. And so there was an issue there. But it was running for that seat with, what came in the issue. So that being said, and we've talked a lot about this, but you have an opponent.
I do.
And so this is a primary race. Kevin Urey does not have an opponent.
Everybody loves Kevin.
Yeah, you have one, and in the other race, there are 4 candidates running for that position. So one of the questions we've asked pretty much everybody on Republican Stronghold is, when the voters walk in the voting booth, what do you want them to remember about you that will cause them to vote for you?
Hopefully I've done a good job explaining what the Court of Criminal Appeals does. They take petitions, you have to convince them, and not only do you have to convince them, but you get to frame the issues. So whoever's taking the issue there, You convince the court to take it, and sometimes they modify it, but by and large, you are choosing what comes before that court. Then you get to do the briefing, and if you've done your job right, you've done about 80% of the work for the court. And if you get oral argument, which thankfully they're increasingly doing, that's even better, because you get to have a conversation with them that convince them that your view of the law is the preferable one. In the last 15 years at the state prosecuting attorney's office, I've done all three of those things: petitions and briefs and oral arguments, more than any other person in Texas. And my opponent says, well, if you want a brief writer, vote for my opponent. Arguably, I'm the brief writer. I have had more influence over the decisions of that court than anybody not on the court in the last 15 years. And I've lost my share. Cases that I don't think I should have, because again, I've not made an argument that I didn't think was fair and right. So if you want somebody to actually on day one get to work on the court, getting things back on track, granting more decisions, getting them done quickly, I suggest voting for somebody who's been doing that as a career for 15 years.
Great. Well, we appreciate you coming out, and I hope that the public has found this very educational about the courts. It's a tough thing to get your hands around when you're not a lawyer. But I appreciate your explanations and what people will remember when they go in that voting booth and cast their ballot.
Thank you
And
for
that
having
will
me.
be early voting February 17th to the 27th. Starts on a Tuesday because of the holiday on the 16th. And then election day primary day is March 3rd. And we wish you a lot of luck, and thanks very much for coming to join us.
Thank you for having me.